Imagine, if you will, the world before the year 1450. A world of intellectual silence. A world where knowledge was not a light that could be switched on, but a precious, physical object, heavy, expensive, and incredibly rare. In the vast libraries of Europe, you would not find rows upon rows of books, but perhaps a few hundred volumes, each one so valuable it was literally chained to the desk. Each book was a unique masterpiece, painstakingly copied by hand over months or even years by monastic scribes, their hands cramping, their eyes straining by candlelight. This was a system where ideas moved at a glacial pace, at the speed of a walking man or a sailing ship. Knowledge was a fortress, and its gates were guarded by the very few, the church and the political elite. To be literate was to be powerful, and power was not meant to be shared. But in the German city of Mainz, a revolution was brewing in a workshop, led by a man who was no fiery-eyed revolutionary. Johannes Gutenberg was a craftsman, a goldsmith by trade. His genius was not a single flash of inspiration, but a slow, stubborn fusion of several existing technologies into one perfect, world-shattering system. He saw a problem and engineered a solution. His eureka moment was a process, crafting individual letters of movable metal type from a hard-wearing alloy of lead, tin, and antimony, modifying the screw press used for wine and olive oil to apply even pressure, and formulating a viscous oil-based ink that would adhere cleanly to metal and transfer clearly to paper or vellum. This was not magic. It was machinery. It was the invention of replication itself. So, how did this marvel actually work? The process began with the type itself. Gutenberg created a steel mold for each letter of the alphabet. Into these molds, he could pour his molten alloy, producing hundreds of identical reusable characters. A typesetter would then stand at his compositing stick, selecting each individual letter, each piece of punctuation, and placing them in a frame, line by line, mirror image, and backwards, to form a page of text. This composed frame, or form, was locked into the bed of the press. The printer would then ink the raised surface of the type with leather-covered ink balls, place a sheet of dampened paper over it, and slide the bed under the massive wooden screw. With a strong pull on the lever, the platen pressed down onto the paper, transferring the text. Release, remove the paper, and repeat. Hundreds of times a day. This was the first great act of mass production, and its product was thought. To prove his invention's worth, Gutenberg chose the most ambitious project imaginable, a Bible. But not just any Bible. The Gutenberg Bible, also known as the 42-line Bible for the number of lines on each page, was his ultimate statement. It was designed to be breathtaking. With its crisp, Gothic black-letter type and spaces left for magnificent hand-painted illuminations, it was every bit as beautiful and authoritative as the finest scribal work. But it was not unique. It was repeatable. This was his product launch, and it was a sensation. He printed approximately 180 copies, and to the wealthy patrons who bought them, it was not just a holy book, it was a miraculous piece of technology. For the first time in history, two identical Bibles could exist in two different cities. It was the first bestseller, and it announced, in no uncertain terms, that the world of knowledge would never be the same again. The spark had been struck. The fire was about to spread. The spark had been struck in Mainz. Now the fire began to spread, not as a gentle wave, but as a shock wave, a deafening, irreversible explosion of information that would tear through the very fabric of European society. The quiet, controlled world of manuscript knowledge was about to be shattered by the relentless, mechanical clunk-thud of the printing press. Before Gutenberg, knowledge was a fortress, its gates heavily guarded. A single book, like a Bible, could cost the equivalent of a house, a sum fathomable only to the wealthiest nobles and powerful institutions. It was a luxury item, a symbol of status as much as a source of learning. But within a few decades of that first Bible rolling off the press, something miraculous happened. The cost of books plummeted. A text that once required a king's ransom could now be had for the wages a common craftsman might earn in a few weeks. This was perhaps the most immediate and profound effect: the radical democratization of knowledge. The gates of the fortress were not just opened, they were blown off their hinges. Suddenly, the merchant, the lawyer, the curious local doctor, even the prosperous farmer could amass a small library. Knowledge was no longer a sacred relic to be revered from a distance. It became a tool, a commodity, a possession. It was taken down from the chains of the monastery and placed on a desk in a common home. And with this newfound access came an insatiable hunger. If you own nothing to read, there is little incentive to learn. But when pamphlets, almanacs, and translated texts become affordable, the very desire to read is ignited. Literacy, once a specialized skill for clerics and bureaucrats, began its slow but steady transformation into a public utility. Parents, seeing the new opportunities afforded by the printed word, were more inclined to send their sons, and in some progressive circles, even their daughters, to schools. Reading shifted from being a professional requirement for a select few to a gateway to personal advancement for the many. It was a quiet revolution happening in thousands of homes and towns across the continent, a revolution fueled by the simple, powerful idea that a person could learn something new, on their own, by simply turning a page. The intellectual monopoly of the elite was over. This flood of new books and new readers brought with it a second, equally profound change: the standardization of knowledge and language. In the age of the scribe, no two copies of a book were ever truly identical. Each manuscript was a unique performance, subject to the quirks, tired eyes, and personal biases of the copyist. Errors crept in, were copied again, and multiplied over generations. A classical text by Aristotle or Galen could become distorted, like a message passed through a game of Chinese whispers across centuries. The printing press ended this. For the first time in human history, 1,000 copies of a single text could be absolutely, perfectly identical. A scholar in Paris and a student in Padua could now be certain they were debating from the exact same set of words, the same diagrams, the same page numbers. This created a new, solid foundation for knowledge. Science could now be built upon verifiable, consistent data, not on a corrupted copy of a copy. The collective memory of civilization was given a permanent, reliable record. This standardization extended beyond individual texts to language itself. Europe was a cacophony of regional dialects. What was spoken in London was often unintelligible to someone from the north of England. The same was true for the various forms of German, Italian, and French. The printing press, for purely commercial reasons, began to smooth out these variations. Printers naturally gravitated towards the most widely understood dialects, often those used in powerful political courts or bustling commercial centers, to maximize their market. William Caxton, the first English printer, famously wrote of the difficulty in choosing which form of English to use, worried that his books would be laughed at for their strange spellings. But by making a choice, he and printers like him across Europe began to codify language. The way words were spelled, the grammar that was used, slowly became fixed on the printed page. This printed form began to influence the spoken word, gradually forging dozens of disparate dialects into more unified national languages: a standard German, a standard French, a standard English. The press didn't just spread language, it helped create the modern idea of what a language is, fostering a new sense of shared national identity that would eventually supersede local loyalties. Out of this new landscape of affordable, standardized texts emerged a revolutionary concept: the Republic of Letters. This was not a physical place but an imagined community, the first true international intellectual network. Before the press, a scholar working in isolation might spend a lifetime rediscovering something that was already known in another country, simply because he had no access to the latest work. Ideas moved at a glacial pace. Now, a breakthrough published in Venice could be read, debated, and built upon in Krakow or Oxford within months. Scholars who had once labored in solitude suddenly found themselves in constant conversation with minds across the continent. They corresponded feverishly. Their letters often carried alongside crates of books shipped along newly established trade routes. This created an unprecedented acceleration of progress. The scientific method, reliant on the sharing and verification of results, was supercharged. Astronomers like Copernicus could access more reliable star charts. Anatomists like Vesalius could publish intricate, detailed engravings of the human body that every aspiring doctor could study, creating a new, accurate visual language for medicine. The recovery of classical texts, the very heart of the Renaissance, exploded. Notaries scoured monastery libraries for forgotten Greek and Roman manuscripts, and printers rushed to publish them. For the first time, thinkers like Erasmus could produce a critical, cleaned-up edition of the Greek New Testament, allowing scholars to finally engage with the original source material of Christianity, free from centuries of scribal errors. This republic of letters was a community bound by ink and paper, a collaborative engine of progress that began to push human understanding forward at a speed that would have been unimaginable just a generation before. It was the birth of the modern intellectual world. The shock wave was now rippling outwards in every direction. Knowledge was cheaper and more widespread than ever before. It was standardized and reliable. It was connecting minds across vast distances. The silent, controlled world of manuscript culture was gone, replaced by the vibrant, noisy, and often chaotic din of public debate. The press had unleashed the word, and the word was now loose in the world, ready to challenge the oldest and most powerful institutions ever known. The next stop for this shockwave would be the very altar of European power itself. The quiet was well and truly over. The revolution had begun. The shockwave of cheap, standardized, and interconnected knowledge did not simply ripple through the quiet halls of academia. It soon reached the foundations of society itself, and it began to shake them. The democratization of knowledge set the stage, but the next act was revolution. The press had given Europe a new voice, and that voice was about to shout in protest, question the heavens, and rewrite the rules of nature, art, and power. The first and most dramatic tremor was the religious earthquake we now call the Protestant Reformation. For centuries, the Catholic Church had been the unrivaled spiritual and intellectual authority of Western Europe. Its liturgy was in Latin, a language only the educated could understand. Its interpretation of Scripture was mediated through a priestly class. But into this world stepped an argumentative German monk named Martin Luther. In 1517, he famously nailed his 95 Theses, a list of grievances against church practices like the sale of indulgences, to the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church. This act itself was a standard academic practice, an invitation to a scholarly debate, but what happened next was anything but standard. The Theses did not stay on that door. They were copied, not by scribes, but by printers. Within weeks, Luther's arguments were racing across Germany in pamphlet form. Within months, they had spread to every corner of Europe. The Church, which had effortlessly silenced critics like Jan Hus a century earlier by burning him at the stake, now faced a new and insurmountable problem. You cannot burn an idea that exists in thousands of identical copies. Luther, perhaps the first true media genius, understood the power of his new ally instinctively. He bypassed the Latin-speaking elite and wrote his tracts in a vigorous, clear German, directly appealing to the common people. He translated the New Testament into German, placing the Word of God directly into the hands of any layperson who could read, empowering them to interpret it for themselves. The printing press made Luther a superstar. His writings accounted for a staggering third of all books sold in Germany in the first years of the Reformation. It was a revolution powered by paper and ink, and it shattered the religious unity of Christendom forever, redrawing the map of Europe and altering the course of history. The press had made it possible, and it ensured it was irreversible. Simultaneously, another, quieter revolution was unfolding, one that would change our very understanding of the universe. The scientific revolution was built quite literally upon the printed page. Before the press, a natural philosopher like Copernicus might guard his heretical idea of a sun-centered universe for decades, fearing ridicule and error. But with the press, he could finally publish his life's work on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres, knowing its complex mathematical tables and diagrams would be reproduced with perfect accuracy for scholars across the continent to see. This was the new power of science. It became cumulative and verifiable. The Belgian anatomist Andreas Vesalius could now publish De Humani Corporis Fabrica, on the fabric of the human body, a monumental work filled with exquisitely detailed engravings of the human anatomy based on actual dissection. For the first time, every medical student could have an accurate shared visual reference, overthrowing centuries of Galenic errors that had been perpetuated through flawed manuscripts. Astronomers like Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler could share precise stellar observations. Mathematicians could publish complex formulas, knowing the symbols would not be distorted by a careless scribe. The press created a permanent, growing repository of knowledge. A scientist in England could stand on the shoulders of a giant from Italy, because the Italian's work was reliably there, in print, for him to study. It accelerated the pace of discovery from a crawl to a sprint, laying the groundwork for the world we know today. Beyond the cathedral and the laboratory, the press was also triggering a profound cultural shift. Latin, the language of scholars and the church, began to recede from public life, replaced by the vibrant vernacular tongues of the people. Writers like Dante and Chaucer had written in Italian and English before, but now their works, and those of new authors, could be widely distributed. This did more than just entertain. It forged national identities. People in France, reading stories and poems in a standardized French, began to feel a sense of shared Frenchness that transcended their regional loyalties. The same was happening in England, Spain, and Germany. The press gave nations a common voice. It also created entirely new forms of media. The quick, cheap pamphlet became the social media of its day, the vehicle for political argument, satire, and news. The broadside, a single large sheet of paper often with a dramatic image and text, functioned as a poster, an advertisement, or a piece of propaganda pasted on tavern walls for all to see. Eventually, this would evolve into the first newspapers, giving birth to the very concept of public opinion and a society that could be informed and inflamed by current events. Even art was transformed. Woodcuts and engravings allowed masters like Albrecht Dürer to mass-produce their images, making art affordable for the middle class and allowing artistic styles and Renaissance ideas to spread visually to audiences who could not read. But this new power was a double-edged sword, the very technology that spread Luther's reforms, and Vesalius's anatomies could also spread hatred, panic, and lies just as quickly. The first viral misinformation campaigns began almost immediately. Malicious pamphlets spread terrifying stories, often anti-Semitic or xenophobic in nature, whipping up mob violence. Governments and the church, terrified of this uncontrollable new medium, fought back with censorship. The Catholic Church established the Index of Forbidden Books, a list of publications faithful Catholics were banned from reading. The mere existence of the index is a powerful testament to the press's disruptive power. You don't bother banning something that is not a profound threat. Furthermore, the rise of literacy created a new social division, the literate and the illiterate. For the first time, the inability to read wasn't just normal, it was a marker of being left behind, of being excluded from the great conversations shaping society. The press, a tool of democratization, also had the power to create new elites and new marginalized classes. Yet, despite these unintended consequences, the press's ultimate legacy is as the undeniable bridge to the modern world. Every major movement that followed flowed directly from its invention. The scientific revolution it enabled gave us a new vision of the cosmos. The Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason, debate, and individual rights, was unimaginable without the free flow of ideas the press had pioneered. The American and French revolutions were born in pamphlets and newspapers. Thomas Paine's Common Sense was a printing press phenomenon, a bestseller that convinced a colony to become a nation. In many ways, the printing press was the Internet of the Renaissance. It was the first technology to truly disrupt the flow of information, democratize knowledge, create new communities, unleash a flood of new content, and terrify established authorities. It rewired human consciousness, shifting us from a culture of memory and oral tradition to one of record and text. It taught us to think in linear arguments and to trust the fixed printed word. We began our story in the silence of a chained library, a world where ideas moved at the speed of a walking man. We ended in a world roaring with debate, a world connected by the printed page, a world hurtling toward a future it was only beginning to imagine. Johannes Gutenberg, a businessman who died without great wealth, never saw the full scale of the earthquake he had triggered. He simply solved a mechanical problem. But in doing so, he unlocked the power of the word, and in unleashing that word, he ultimately unleashed us. The modern world, for all its complexity and noise, was born in the quiet clunk-thud of a press in Mainz, a sound that echoes through every page of history written since. So let us return for a final moment to where we began. To the hushed silence of that pre-Gutenberg library, a world where knowledge was a fortress, its treasures chained to desks, its gates guarded by a privileged few. A world where ideas moved at the speed of a pilgrim's feet, and the collective wisdom of an age could be contained within a single room. It was a world of profound intellectual isolation. Now, listen to the world the printing press created. Hear the relentless, rhythmic clunk-thud of the press in 100 European cities. Hear the rustle of thousands of turning pages in 1,000 common homes. Hear the furious, passionate debates in taverns and town squares, arguments fueled by pamphlets and broadsides. Hear the voices of Luther, Erasmus, and Copernicus, no longer solitary whispers but a roaring chorus, amplified 1,000-fold by ink and paper. This was the new sound of the world, the sound of argument, of discovery, of revolution. The silence was not just broken, it was replaced by the vibrant, chaotic, and unstoppable noise of public discourse. The fortress of knowledge lay in ruins, and in its place stood a bustling, sprawling marketplace of ideas. And at the heart of this astonishing transformation stands a figure of profound irony, Johannes Gutenberg. He was not a revolutionary philosopher or a radical theologian. He was a craftsman, an entrepreneur, a man who likely saw his invention not as a world historical force, but as a brilliant commercial opportunity, a means to produce valuable books, and, he hoped, a steady profit. He sought to make money, not history. He died without great wealth or widespread fame, unaware of the true magnitude of the earthquake he had triggered. Yet, in solving a series of mechanical problems, alloying metal, formulating ink, modifying a press, he inadvertently built the machine that built the modern world. He took the word, once confined and curated, and he unlocked its power, setting it free to shape human destiny. The journey from that first Bible in Mainz to the Enlightenment, to the scientific method, to the concept of informed public consent, is a direct line. Every time we read a book, search for information, value a free press, or engage in a debate based on shared facts, we are living in the world that Gutenberg's invention forged. We are the children of the word unleashed. And the echo of that first press rolling out its timeless message still resonates in every single page of our story.